Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled about talking here today and about this chance of sharing a few of my thoughts on embarking in a PhD adventure. We know how well that doing PhD is a serious, rigorous, and heavy process, and I congratulate you all for embarking on it. This is a great place to learn. Today, however, I wanted to challenge this seriousness and importance with a frivolous and maybe playful, transgressive approach. Pleasure, happiness, and diversion as PhD. It should help play a bit with attention and a bit of drama added to my story. Pleasure, happiness, and diversion to articulate my thoughts on how serious must a doctoral dissertation be. El dedicar vindrà primer, Gabriel Ferreter. A poet and Catalan intellectual in the early foundation of the Universitat Autonoma de Barcelona wrote a digressive and playful long poem called Unfinished Poem. Published in his book The Theory of the Bodies in 1966, the poem started with a dedication that I want to turn into gratitude now. The thanking, therefore, will come first. Thank you, Josep Maria Blanco, for having brought me here. You know how much this means to me. I started in 1993 as an advertising and PR student, and then continued towards my PhD here too. It feels like coming home after a very long trip, to this place that built the foundations of who I am, terrified and nervous right now. This is an extraordinary honor. Also, thank you, Ileana Zeller, for this fabulous matchmaking. There is a lot of people to thank, but I will mention some people who were in my very first academic steps. Here goes then to the late Professor Luis Badilla, who activated my curiosity and invited me to read Habermas, even too early in my work. And there his supervisor, Professor Jordi Berrio, who later became my supervisor too. But I also want to thank Dra. Carme Ferrer, still around here. She was writing her PhD while we played with the very, very first emails, literally in the early 90s. It has been 30 long years, and these were my references, mostly accidental, when I decided to hit that thing that was the PhD road. But I do not want to go sentimental here, not today. Instead, I want to share that a PhD must never, ever be a lonely process. Students and supervisors must work and grow and learn together in that path. The path must be full of acquaintances, full of discovery and influences. With what pleasure, what joy you enter harbors you're seeing for the first time. Today, I want to start with a question and 3 ideas that help me answering it. And the question goes, in times of data algorithms, deep machine learning and artificial intelligence, does it still make sense to embark on a PhD? A PhD is quite a commitment and a big effort, and it must be a valuable thing. So it is important to ask the question, do datification, platformization, deep mediatization, or even brain rot threaten the idea of doing a PhD? And maybe the work of academia as a whole? I think that there are 3 factors that help remind that the PhD adventure must be fundamentally human and relevant, even if it is with the help of the learning machine. So 3 ideas here. The first factor is pleasure. Thinking as a form of transforming ourselves, the awareness of our own ignorance. Curiosity, the thirst for knowledge, problem-solving puzzles, they are all good strands to consider at the heart of embarking in any of those PhD roads. The second factor is happiness, a particular form of happiness, the happiness that starts right beyond ourselves. Happiness is a shared collective social common public good. I will develop on this to understand why any doctoral and academic adventure must be informed by the pursuit of happiness. And finally, the third factor, I will talk about diversion today. Diversion is not enough enhanced through our systems of schedules, direction, and agendas, the institutional worship of structures, plans, calendars, and above all, deadlines. Of course, deadlines matter. In academia is built on deadlines, but the quest for a PhD requires some good diversion. This is a wonder, a deviation, and maybe even to get lost. There ain't no fun in holding back. These are three factors that might save us from the doom of artificial intelligence doing doctorates for us. Pleasure, happiness, and diversion. PhD. Life is a unique experience, and yet we feel the urge to capture it to the extent of possible. And by capturing it, we believe that we are immortalizing the experience. And then we feel the urge to share it, generating a very valuable and permanent flow of very specific data that tells a lot about ourselves, that shapes patterns and behaviors, individuals in multiple ways, like these two, the Duolingo and the Spotify rappers, that just tell you about what you did and you listened to last year, but also and foremost, collective patterns of behavior that are entangled and explored through complex algorithmic processes. These processes build and rebuild models of what we call artificial intelligence. When we say the words artificial intelligence, our brain either blinds itself by some shiny light of enthrallment or a form of illuminated happiness, or it shuts down and black boxes whatever comes inside and its related words in the cloud as a too technical, foggy process that we cannot think of. Yes, true, we do the same with mobile phones and with the internet, and so what? Well, it is difficult to think the implications and the social extension of something like artificial intelligence if it is either too bright or too dark to be thought of. So let me work with you to momentarily unclasp this idea of artificial intelligence so that we can start exploring what and how it operates. This is a diagram for a neural network. Not all forms of artificial intelligence work exactly like as a neural network. There are more forms, but this is a good way to understand some of the principles and dynamics about how it builds and how it works. If we pay attention to the diagram, we see three moments. The input layer is made of data that we generate and other data that will be used to train or to test the model multiple times. Then there is the output layer that offers decisions and choices and gives us the results, the ones we assume and take and consider for decision making. And the central set of layers, think of it as a pastry with layers and layers and layers expanding in complexity. What happens there? Well, what happens there is that in those hidden layers, 1, 2, and 3, there are usually more, the nodes become intermediate possible results that usually combine probabilistic operations with combinatorial options. They balance the weights and the bias of the links between them and test the results at every stage once and again and again. Each node of neuron of these points is the product of combining information from previous nodes, and then it generates results that become inputs for the next node and the next layer. The process repeats in multiple times and often in multiple directions in a process called backpropagation to identify what are the optimals and the most fitting results. This is results that act in concordance with the patterns that repeat from the training material, which is the input layer. The final result in the output layers appears in alignment with what the model has seen before in a sophisticated and mechanic effort to fit in. It is indeed the machine testing results. If you can imagine this, artificial intelligence is not quite a creative process, although it can find intelligent solutions, but rather a complex and rich system of probability. Still, this wave of artificial intelligence has hit hard in all areas of our lives, and it is here to stay. Philosopher of technology and artificial intelligence ethics champion Shannon Valor stated some weeks ago in an interview, artificial intelligence has become woven into the fabric of our daily existence, where it excels and where it falls short. But she also reminded how artificial intelligence is only as good as the data it is trained on. and the ramifications this could have for those subject to its power. But in all, today, 77% of devices, from smartphones to smart home devices, incorporate some forms of artificial intelligence. This includes everything smart. 9 out of 10 organizations support artificial intelligence for competitive advantage. Businesses are increasingly artificial intelligence to improve their operations and gain an edge over their competitors. Artificial intelligence is projected to contribute $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. This is a significant amount of money, and it shows just how important artificial intelligence is becoming. In terms of jobs, artificial intelligence market size is expected to grow by at least 120% year over year. This is a very high rate of growth, and it shows that artificial intelligence is a very hot topic right now. And the Europol Innovation Lab Observatory predicted in 2021 that by next year, 2025, so now, 90% of the internet contents will be created by artificial intelligence already. Overall statistics, they show that artificial intelligence is becoming more and more and more important in our lives. It is being used in a variety of ways, and it is having a significant impact on the global economy. Artificial intelligence is revolutionizing the field of strategic and corporate communication too, offering a wide range of applications to enhance efficiency, effectiveness, and decision-making, data-driven insights and analysis, audience segmentation, predictive analytics, content creation, curation of content generation and personalization, multi-channel communication, and monitoring. Publics, management, employees, and staff teams, crisis communication, rapid response. Artificial intelligence can quickly identify and analyze potential crises, enabling organizations to respond promptly and effectively. It is important that we use artificial intelligence ethically and responsibly in strategic and corporate communication. This includes human oversight, maintaining humans' oversight to ensure that artificial intelligence is used appropriately and ethically on top of it. With the amount of data out there, and with the impressive work of our friends, the generative artificial intelligence system, OpenAI, GPT-4, Google Gemini, or Images Deep Artificial Intelligence, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, OpenAI, DALL-E 2, GitHub Copilot by Microsoft, Jasper AI for content creation, you name it. Does it still make sense to embark on a PhD? One could have a complete PhD written in a few hours, and even for free. And most of that time, the time would be spent at checking the results of the automated writing and at checking the sources and the references and probably writing something like an introduction out of the original prompt used. So why? Why bother? Why would we spend a minute of our lives writing a PhD, embarking in this long run process, in this big quest that we have among us? And why? Why would we dedicate, this big chunk of our lives to train ourselves and to finally get a degree that will make us somehow available or part of the academic community? It's a path, similar to what Josep Maria Blanco suggests. It's like a quest to bring in the ring to Mordor. But what if the PhD is more like a quixotic quest that involves fighting windmills of imaginary giants, now that artificial intelligence has its brain dry of so much reading and we have no more questions to ask, no more adventures to chase? When life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be too practical is madness. To surrender dreams, this might be madness. Too much sanity might be madness. And the maddest of all, to see life as it is and not as it should be. Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote. So I'm actually a big fan of using artificial intelligence for research, as much as I was a fan of using the internet sources when we started so long ago. These new technologies and their possibilities can help us discuss, develop, and should be embedded in our research too, openly, clearly, with rigor and transparency. Not against it, particularly if we consider their limitations and our own human space in them. And if we make sure that we do not sacrifice our ethical capacity, our powerful senses of humanity to this self-deep learned machine that enthralls us, with their capacity to please us with coded system of probabilistic repetition. This is why I suggest 3 strategies for human survival that will help rescue and secure the human relevance within this ecosystem of artificial intelligence: pleasure, happiness, and diversion. This triad offers 3 dimensions of the ethics, criticism, and solidarity that cannot be programmed or algorithmically designed. Let me start then talking about the first, pleasure. Of course, if we talk about pleasure, we know that artificial intelligence is already there. We train with monitors for our heart rates. We use devices that calculate the sweat and the calories. We type and record our periods and our schedules. We record our travels and our explorations. We use chats for pleasure and meet using dating apps. And we watch porn and scroll through bodies and profiles for a few hours every day while waiting for the buzz, while waiting for the water to boil. And with all this succulent and intimate data available out there, there are algorithms that started already cooking with it. A millisecond longer on a platform and some profile catches our interest. Our devices have picked this long before we are aware of it. And artificial intelligence, as much as Google, Meta, and Microsoft, know our secret leans and tastes, as much as our secret crush, often before ourselves. Artificial intelligence knows about our pleasure and has calculated the probabilistic neural chances of it all too. Ours and the pleasures of those next to us and the pleasure of those similar to us. Algorithms are creepy, are nosy, and sticky. But this is not exactly the pleasure I would like to talk about today. Instead, I want to talk about another kind of pleasure. Indeed, the first necessary stop in the discussion about pleasure associated to PhD, the P must be the notion of libido science. And as any form of pleasure, this begins with the desire for knowledge, the wish and the thirst to know. As much as with everything that grows from the core of the tension between desire and pleasure, the notion of libido science is carried. The shadow of a sinful drive, the sin of pride that intends to know what is not to be known. There is, true, something intimate and powerful, something personal in the corner of our intellectual wish, a form of restlessness that grows inside us as an incontrollable force that emerges from the uncertainty, that epitomizes our own ignorance, and that then takes us forward, daringly courageous, exploring through the paths of curiosity towards the solving of the riddles, a form of wish for an intellectual achievement. This is, I think, one of the biggest drivers of what needs to bring us here today as researchers. We need to recognize that. We must acknowledge the thirst and embrace it. Similarly, with this central idea of thirst for knowledge, the principle of pleasure through wish appeared in the first sentence of the introduction for Reassembling the Social by Bruno Latour, already in 2005. I have been impressed with this start of the book and captures well this idea of curiosity and fascination. The notion of wonder in English has this double meaning, and I feel like playing with it. Wonder means something that is not known. I wonder what you did last year. I wonder what you're interested in. I wonder how the universe works. But also, it carries this, all science starts with this idea of a query for something that we do not know. But the word wonder also carries the idea of fascination. It is a wonder, and because it is extraordinary, appeals my interest. A form of fascination can be tracked to Galileo Galilei's writings in 1638 about his fascination for the Venetian arsenal and how he opened, and I quote, a large field to speculative minds, end of quote. But my way of approaching pleasure here, and I have to confess, it was the first one I dealt with when planning this conversation, was this beautiful text by Tomás Ibáñez. Tomás Ibáñez was a professor at social psychology at the University of Autonoma of Barcelona, and in February 2000, almost 25 years ago, he gave a speech at the first International Congress of PhD students in social psychology. This beautiful speech has marked my life, I have to confess, throughout. The title, Anchor in Objectivity or Sailing in Pleasure. And among many other powerful things he wrote, allow me, this is a little long but beautiful, he wrote, "Pleasure is what we have left to support our commitment to research. The pleasure of thinking, the pleasure of entering the confrontation game and the knowledge exchange. But above all, research is one. There are others, of course, but it is one of the various practices through which we can experience with some intensity the pleasure of living, the pleasure of feeling alive. And the reason is very simple. On the one hand, life is intrinsically change. It is constant modification. It is incessant information. Life, as we well know, ends when change ceases. On the other hand, thinking truly, seriously and deeply is necessarily changing one's thoughts. After having focused our thoughts intensely and productively on a given issue, we cannot continue thinking about it in the same way as we did before we had it under scrutiny. To think, Foucault said, is always the changing of thoughts. And since what we are is not independent of what we think, thinking is putting ourselves in the trance of changing ourselves too. Thinking is entering the adventure of constantly becoming other of what we were. Life is change. Thinking is change. When we live, we change. When we think, we change. And that's why thinking is one of the ways to savor the unmistakable pleasure of feeling alive. And this might be sufficient reason to underpin our commitment to research." End of quote. And as much as we insist on having a solid project, a feasible project, to define the structure, to make sure that you know what you're going to do throughout at the very beginning, when we actually select a PhD student, when we actually agree on taking another PhD student, what happens is that during your PhD transforms, and it transforms you at the same time. It becomes some kind of story that all of a sudden makes sense. And sometimes it makes sense backwards. It makes sense because you say, oh my God, that's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to do. And I invite you to let this process happen, because there's a form of pleasure in this changing of thoughts, in this transformation of our ways of thinking. And I think Tomás Ibáñez knew about this and was perfect at placing that talk and that thought. So if I was able to talk again, I would say what he said. I can't, but I can invite you to read it as soon as you can, as soon as possible. So, how can pleasure help challenge the advancement of artificial intelligence in the PhD process? Well, first of all, pleasure is very much part of the realm of humans. So the pleasure to think and to transform is very much a way of ticking the captcha box that we are not a robot. But it is more than that. Pleasure is the drive and the pathos, the passion that will ensure that your research is informed by originality, creativity, critical thoughts, and innovation. Let me go now for the second aspect, happiness. Again, when we talk about happiness, as much as pleasure seems to be a very individual thing. When we talk about happiness, we are more or less in the same idea. Happiness as something that we treasure and we feel as ours and as intimate, as close to ourselves. This feeling of happiness as form of plenitude. But if we pay attention to the use of the word happiness and we move back to the 4th of July of 1776, when the United States Congress signed and posted this unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, they wrote the following: "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth that separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I want to keep this idea of the right to pursuit of happiness in mind, but also to the importance of the text of the Declaration of Independence has attracted the attention of many scholars. For instance, this man, Jacques Derrida, in 1971, wrote a very powerful text about it. One of the things that fascinated him is the signature of the document. He wondered, who is signing this paper? We, the people? If the document declares the independence, the people can only become a signatory entity with independence to sign only after the document has been duly signed. This led him to a rich, stimulating and pleasant exploration of the idea of signature as a form that certifies that one has been there, but that one is not there anymore. Something that remains for the future from the past as a present witness. He puts it like this. By definition, a written signature implies the actual or empirical non-presence of the signer, but it also marks and retains his having been present in a past now, which will remain in a future now, and therefore in a now in general, in the transcendental form of newness as a maintenance. Jacques Derrida, Signature, Event, Context. I have worked with this text many times. I like the bending of the thinking, the rich paradox between the absence and the presence. If you think of data, for instance, geolocative data, the one that tracks you when you go for a run, or when Google asks you if you have been in that or that other place, the phone and the data bits that are collected by your phone and extensively by the data platforms does exactly the same thing. It signs a presence in a spot, a signature, a geo-coordinate matched to a timestamp. The phone and the information byte certifies that you were there in the past as a witness that will stay for the future, even if in the present you are not there anymore. Imagine then algorithms in troves reaching for the right formula that anticipates where you will be or how you will go or how many people will be there or if many liked it or not, even if you have never been there. The signature of others works as training material for your experience and vice versa. Geodata is fascinating, but I want to talk about happiness. So let me go back to the Declaration of Independence and the inalienable right to happiness. In her text Action and the Pursuit of Happiness, published in 1960, Hannah Arendt takes up the meaning of this alienable right, life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness in the United States Declaration of Independence. For her, there is a difference between the private happiness and the right of public happiness. For her, public happiness is the joy that accompanies speaking and acting together with others from an intersubjective rather than individualistic and subjective perspective. Public happiness for Arendt, and I quote, is founded upon every citizen having a share in public affairs. This would be possible by ensuring the inclusive participation in public discussion. This is happiness as the right to access and engage in public discussion. This immediately matches an idea that has been central in my work since my PhD and further. And of course, not only my work, but hers when she wrote about the conditions of possibility of the public discussion. Is an easy thread from here to reach the German notion of Öffentlichkeit and its historical translations into French as espace public, into the early Spanish-Mexican translation as publicidad, and the later English translation not into publicness, as it could have been probably even better, but into the idea of the public sphere. That it is central in my work with data, with maps, with location, and with mobility. And, of course, with my esteemed colleagues that tolerated to keep working with me. This idea of happiness explored by Hannah Arendt from the Declaration of Independence is immediately political, because it connects straightforward to the notion of citizenship. There are three features of the public sphere and of the sphere of politics in general that are central to Arendt's conception of citizenship. First, citizenship is a constructed quality, not something we have by nature. It is therefore artificial. This matters because it makes it human, ethical, and product of a decision, not something natural or objective. Second, citizenship has a spatial quality. It is not something that happens in the void, but something that is connected to the space we share, the city, the polis, the country. Note how this hits frontally many discourses on migration today, particularly those that talk about illegal immigrants. For Arendt, this idea is a very unhappy aberration. And third, citizenship must be built on the distinction between public and private interests. This separation implies that the private interests, such as economic interests or political, career, personal interests, cannot enter or alter the conditions for the public discussion. Happiness for Arendt is a public and social good. It is an active interaction in society that ensures the living together in a community, to be able to understand each other and to happily share the world. This is the happiness I want to bring forward when we talk about a PhD, which is obviously and frontally opposed to the Greek concept of idiotes. The idiot, for the Greek, was someone who did not engage or participate in public life. The one who did not join the public discussion and remained selfishly thinking about their own personal interests. Whereas initially the notion was not particularly negative, allow me to use it to claim that the PhD work cannot be idiotic. Instead, it must contribute to the collective and common good. It must engage with the affairs of our society and must offer an engaging reflection destined to improve our social world, ideally by participating and offering the chance of a clean, fair conversation. In April 2018, Marina Garcés, the philosopher at the University of Saragossa, published a letter to Jordi Cuixart, by then in prison, preventively accused of sedition and then pardoned 3 years later. They both had never met each other before, but in the beautiful and powerful letter, Marina Garcés expressed her wish to speak to each other, and she used the formula, tenim ganas de dirnos. When you think about the paraphrasis, it is very powerful. It translates as we feel like telling each other, or we have things to tell each other, or we feel like talking to each other. But it also could mean something like we wish to name each other, as a form of mutual recognition that establishes the fundamental condition for a productive conversation. When I read it for the first time, I felt a deep warmth of recognition. I could identify that that she was offering me a way to explain what my research is about. People feeling like talking to each other, because it is right in that possibility, in that chance of starting a conversation where anything can happen, where revolutions can begin, where communities can properly form. Not from a gene, or from a particular skin color, or a particular language, or a particular territory, even less from a particularly artificially constructed law, but from the basic form of a conversation between equals and the added wish to acknowledge each other as interlocutors and speak. Happiness is this then, the unalienable right to engage in conversation that could lead to changing the world. I think a PhD must have some of that. It must have a dialogue with those who have studied before, those who have researched before, and those situations in the world that need further thinking, further discussion, further conversation on. A thesis is a statement. I invite you all to make this statement into a statement that builds a conversation that leads to changing the world. Why? Why should happiness be at the center of the PhD? Because it will work as an indicator that your research matters, that it is relevant because it talks to those who worked on it before, and because it opens strands of further debate. The happiness of a PhD is a marker for the relevance of the dissertation and for its impact. Because we don't do idiotic research that dies in solitude. Instead, we do research because we care, and because our research matters. And finally, the third factor I want to talk about is diversion. As it has happened with the other two, pleasure is not strictly about pleasure, but intellectual change and challenge. Happiness is not strictly about getting presents, but about a form of social commitment. In the case of diversion, it happens similarly. As much as the PhD and academia in general works around multiple cooking speeds and schedules, calendars, plans and agendas and deadlines, a proper PhD can distinguish itself from an artificial intelligence generated product because it must take a diversion. I picked the idea of diversion because it equivocally links to Spanish notion of fun. Diversion and diversión are so similar. They are false friends. Actually, in English, diversion means deviation. It stands for queer, for diverse, and for disperse. And any good PhD needs to deviate from its course and wander. And it is even good if it gets lost. Let me explain a little bit more of this. The idea of getting lost might be a little daunting and scary, but not only comes with every proper voyage and every proper adventure, but it is often a condition to break new knowledge, to serendipitously find new solutions to old problems. Internet, this space of uncertainty, insists that Einstein said that problems can never be solved by the way of thinking that first created them. And maybe this whole idea of lateral thinking, of daring to change patterns and paths, is sufficient here to make my point on deviation and this diversion. Every PhD needs to embark in an exploration of something yet unknown. And what I'm trying to state here is that this should happen without fear. Considering the idea of diversion again is not something that ends in itself. You do not just get lost on your own and then find yourself again. Getting lost is something more than that. And for me, getting lost must carry a principle of challenge, of courage, and even of transgression. And this has two sides. First, the side that activates the fundamental figure that I have barely mentioned here, the supervisor. Getting lost is the most beautiful and I believe enriching challenge in the relationship with the supervisor, in German, the doctor parent, and in Japanese, the sensei. The disagreement, the transgression, and the wandering away from the paths set by the supervisor are healthy ways for the PhD student to establish their own way. And good supervisors know that. They support and play along. They accompany the student in the process and throw a cable if and when it is needed. The second side that activates this notion of diversion is probably richer and more difficult. It is the transgression of the discipline. This sounds violent already. Discipline has these two layers, right? One that is about the field of work as a territory, and the other that has to do with the rigor, the norms, and the authority. But if a PhD student wants to acquire the voice of an independent scholar, this is what a PhD is about. Challenging the authority is a form of acquiring one voice too. The authority of the author of a research project that holds itself and that discusses with a tradition of knowledge and challenges its authority by following its rule. Katharina Niemeyer from the University of Quebec in Montreal has picked a way of stating it when she writes about the undisciplined. She says, "It is precisely this in between more than two disciplines that makes me passionate about what we do. Similar to research in particle physics, we observe it, we get closer to it, and sometimes create it, but luckily, we can never completely grasp it. For the future of media theory and media art, we have to continue to be undisciplined, and we need to keep on decolonizing our perspectives, cultural bias, minds, and research. We need to keep on translating Steinberg and Salton, rebelling against uniformization of research and thinking, and we need to keep on exploring alternative ways of approaching and doing media theory. But maybe it's time also to move on from that. Diversion helps, not only because it certifies and consolidates and monumentalizes the relationship between the supervisor and the student through the adventures of exploring beyond the borders. It is also a way of moving beyond the disciplinary limits and explore and find new things, to learn from what is beyond the mountain line, but also to contribute to it. All forms of human communication are strategic, and this statement is the necessary passport to break the wall across. How much other areas of the social sciences could learn from strategic communication? I have never forgotten Professor José María Ricarte in my early years at the Universitat Autonoma Barcelona insisting on Aristotle's rhetoric and as a foundation for advertising and strategic communication. Of course, he was right. I have been teaching rhetorics and strategies in political communication all year. Diversion helps. It liberates and consolidates, inspires and opens horizons. Dare to get there. Get lost. And alongside my discussion, these images, provocative and daring, teasy and somewhat artistic, but still uncanny, they were created using deep AI image generator and a form of artificial intelligence that mixes and merges, connects and imitates, that fakes and provides. Look at those impossibly long fingers, those strange bending elbows, and take this view as my initial statement. Pleasure, happiness and diversions are bastions of a form of humanity that cannot be artificially reproduced, but barely imitated. Let's now wrap up my story. We had a question to answer. While artificial intelligence slides in and penetrates all the corners of our daily lives, does writing a PhD still make sense? We have seen that indeed artificial intelligence and its multiple shapes it adopts is built on probabilistic calculations that could stimulate our thinking, but that is as good as the data used to train it. And most of the data online today is already artificially created. We have seen that there are three mechanisms or factors that help us anchor and keep human the process of researching. These mechanisms are pleasure, happiness, and diversions, the initials for PhD. And that pleasure meant this joy of changing thoughts that transform us, that inspirational drive of curiosity and lust and knowledge that will secure our motivation and our creativity. We saw that happiness meant procuring for the social collective good, and that a PhD built on principles of public happiness was key to grant relevance and impact to our research and the aim of making the world a better place. And finally, we just saw and almost sang that to follow this path, we need to get lost and dare to move beyond the disciplinary borders and transgress its authority, because that will secure our independence as researchers and the quality of our project. After all, my bonus track is that the PhD must never be a lonely process. There is always someone interested and working on similar things. Someone or many who have just been there or are about to join. Someone will be interested in what you do, because they are doing something complementary to what you do. I can never be grateful enough to the many wonderful and stimulating humans who have been along my road, and I wish yours, your path, is full of them too. After all, there is nothing more fun than making academic research a transgressive, daring form of indisciplined and happy pleasure. Thank you.